Stormfire, Chapter 1. And apologies, I'm basically just holding a picture up to the screen. Okay, here we go. Fleet Admiral Shindo Gord was looking through old hollows of her crew. She had had a good day with her grandchildren and children who were preparing for college, but at the grandchildren who were preparing for college. But when they left, the old sadness returned as she looked at the hollows of her old comrades. If only she had read the danger signs earlier, the Crondor cruiser may not have decimated three-quarters of her fleet, 68 ships in total, and totaling over 250,000 crew. All in all, a terrible day. She then looked over at the picture of her husband. If Roger were here now, he would rebuke her and remind her that command is inherently dangerous and that no one could have predicted what happened that day. Yet she could not rid herself of the sense that she could have done more or done something. Mm, mm, She, she remembered the chain of events. They had entered system 46789-7843 at 0546 ship time. They did an initial scan of the system and saw that there were 25 planets, a number of planetoids, a huge number of moons, and millions of asteroids and comets. The scan also showed that it was densely populated. No less than 15 of the planets had billions of inhabitants on each planet. The others had populations in the hundreds of millions. Even the planetoids all had over a million life forms on them. There also seemed to be a lot of heavy industry going on, and there were orbital construction and processing plants everywhere. That's when the Frondon cruiser appeared, at 10 kilometers long and 6 wide. It blotted out the view screen. Her largest ship, a 1,000-meter long fleet carrier, carrying 4 combat and 6 research and survey squadrons. It never got a chance to launch a single craft. Without warning, the Frondon craft unleashed a massive barrage of weaponry that destroyed the carrier and its escorts. 20 barrages later, three-quarters of her survey fleet was gone, and the rest barely had time to engage engines and retreat. When they returned back to UCP's base, they were greeted by a combat support tender who took them to the nearest sector base. Upon arrival, Fleet Admiral Shindo Gord was immediately stripped of command and court-martialed. The trial was extremely uncomfortable affair in which the prosecutor all but blamed everything on her, that it was her incompetence, her lack of judgment, her, her lack of command skills that got three-quarters of her fleet destroyed. If she could, she would have throttled the prosecutor there and then. But she had stood it all, and in the end was found not guilty. But by the end, he had realized that the best thing for her would be to leave his service. So she took early retirement and settled back at home at the grand old age of 472, which by modern UCP standards is roughly middle-aged. And so here he had been for the last 5 years. As she was deep within her thoughts, the holocron went off. She answered it, and to her immense surprise, there stood Fleet Admiral Dave Donaldson, an old associate of hers, who had served with her for a long time. "Hello, Donald," he said. "Hello, Shindo. You're looking very well." "Why, thank you, Donald. Tell me, what do I deserve the pleasure of this call for?" And he said, "Well, firstly, I haven't talked to you in a long time, so I wanted to see how you were doing." And he said, "Oh, well, fine. I've got lots to do. New projects are warming up." At this point, her old friend S and looked at her with a conspiratorial um, expression. "You know, you always were a terrible liar, Linda." And 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 she simply laughed and said, "You know me too well." And both of them shared a moment of laughter. It was just like old times again. But then Donaldson started laughing and suddenly looked very serious and said, "Seeing as how you're so bored, have you perhaps thought about re-enlisting in the service?" Shindo looked at him and simply said, "No." And besides, who would give me a command now? At this, Donaldson looked at her slyly and said, "Well, actually, there is a need for a very talented fleet admiral. And seeing as how they couldn't get me, I suggested that they try you." At this, Shindo's interest got perked. For all of her sort of the thoughts about not getting back into the service, the truth is that if she had spent virtually all of her adult life training to be in the UCP fleet. She didn't know how to do anything else and was chomping at the bit to return. What do you mean? He said, confused. He said, well, apparently there's a secret mission in the offing, and it's in Crondon space, so you get to have a bit of revenge. He needs somebody who is not a active officer, to take a secret fleet into Crondon space and then do some recon work. And you're the best person for that job. At this, Shindo suddenly became very quiet, and he said, they want me to take a fleet back there, and Donaldson said yes, but this time the ships that you are taking are super secret and super advanced. They are a match for the Crondon cruisers. In fact, it's thought that they are superior to the Crondon cruisers. This time, it will be different. Is that something that perhaps you would be interested in? Hinda, looking back, uh, smiled and said, maybe, maybe it is. End of chapter 1.